Hey guys, what's going on? Valky here, and if you clicked on this video, you must have seen the millions of screenshots where dudes are just getting a crazy amount of MolaGoras, and that's because we currently have one of the best MolaGora farming events in the entire... Don't worry about that one. That one might be mine. We currently have the best MolaGora event in the entire history of the game right now. So if you spend any amount of energy, you have a chance to roll this box, which has a chance of giving you 30 to 50 MolaGoras, which is probably the most anything in the history of the game won't give you. So as is with that many MolaGoras, a lot of people have asked me how to Mola this character, how to Mola that character. Obviously, if I just went over every character one by one, it'll take infinite amounts of time. So today I'm teaching you guys the quickest rules to pick up when you are looking to skill up your characters. Let's fly. So one of the first things you're going to pick up when you look to skill up your characters is every single 4 and 5 star character will have 15 points of skill you can level up. And that generally results in 33 MolaGoras used per 5-star character you fully skill up, and 22 per 4-star characters. So you can imagine if you wanted to build like 100-something characters throughout your time playing the game, you are going to be needing hundreds, if not thousands of these. So where do MolaGoras belong and where are they best used? Well, some people will say, oh, use it on the limited characters, use it on your ML5s, the really broken characters. Of course, but the number one thing you should use these on are the characters you play the most. As an example, if you play a lot of RTA, you'll know that New Moon Luna is a character that's banned, pre-banned all the damn time. On the other hand, Hellion Lua is a character where, because she isn't as strong as New Moon Luna, she doesn't catch as many pre-bans, most of the time, you'll actually have Hellion Lua actually make it into your game. So as such, if you think about it, most of the time, New Moon Luna MolaGoras and her skill ups actually don't matter. Hellion Lua, in general, I will say, because both characters I have at plus 15, these 15 MolaGoras have earned their state way more than the New Moon Luna ones. Although, I'm not going to let this character get by me without MolaGoring, without skilling her up. So if you're a new player and you're deciding between like these two characters, for example, just go play a little bit of the game and see which character you'll end up with the most. And in general, that is my personal number one rule when I look at how I'm going to be building a character. Now, the other one with that is, obviously, I'm an RTA player. Now, you could be a new player, and you're going to need to Mola PvE units. Everybody will have something different. For example, I watch YD a lot. YD is a Guild War main. He's a Guild War player. And compared to myself, who is an RTA player, we're going to have vastly different amounts of units we use. And, on the other hand, you're going to have an Arena player who uses Judge Kisei a lot. So Judge Kisei is a plus 15 character to them, but to somebody who only plays Guild War, she is not even usable, and she is maybe very, very niche tangentially usable in RTA. So your mileage may vary depending on what you play, and there's no better way of finding out which characters deserve your MolaGora than jumping into the game, FA and FO, right? Fuck around and find out. If you missed a kill on your main DPS unit, well, then put more points into their damage. Now, another thing you can do is have budget MolaGoras. And what that means is, if you look at Judge Kisei here, she's a damage dealer. So obviously, with damage dealer, the rule of thumb is you want a plus 15 to max them out. But Judge Kisei is generally played with the cleave playstyle. And the cleave playstyle is usually finding one combo and letting them run for 1 to 2 turns. Judge Kisei only cares about her skill 2 and skill 3. So what you can feasibly do is skip 4 points of MolaGora, which lets you save probably about 7 to 10 MolaGoras by only using her skill 2 and skill 3. Sometimes you're going to use her whole combo, but she doesn't end the fight immediately, and that's where the skill 1 becomes valuable. This goes for anything that is a cleave damage dealer. Anything being played mostly with cleave, you really just care about the parts of their skills that are part of their combo. For example, Green Villager is another good example. When you play him in cleave, you really just care about the S3 damage and very rarely the S2 extra attack. And you're pretty much never using the S1 unless you're somehow expecting for a fight to drag out more than long enough. outside of cleave DPS, you also have characters like Lionheart Sirmia, who is a Bruiser. Now, she has a really simple Mola path. If I was trying to save Molas when I'm skilling her up, I would just simply skip her S1. S1 is just not enough of her damage, and mostly I just care about the S2 cooldown and the S3 damage, which lets me punch home all of the damage you need. This is like 95% of her damage, and S1 just, you know, it's there to tickle your opponents when you're on cooldown. So figure out how much damage your character does, if it's what job they perform, and if it's, you know, more than 85 to 90% of their job description, then put the Mola in it and save the last 10% when you have a surplus of MolaGoras, like if you hit it big during the Mola event. Now, let's quickly go over some of the archetypes, and I'll give you guys some examples on how characters should be Mola'd. Let's go over some of the openers. When you're looking at openers, most of these characters have some kind of passive, and they have some kind of debuff related to their ultimate skill. Hellion Lua, you care about the strip and the provoke chance, so getting the cooldown and the effect chance is mandatory, because if you miss the debuff, she just feels terrible. But at the very, very least, if you are seriously on a budget, at least make sure you get the cooldown, since her short cooldown is one of the most oppressive mechanics in the game. One of her biggest assets also is her combat readiness push for your entire team, so I like to make sure I have that next to the cooldown. And of course, if you play her in a longer fight, you'll know that her S1 provoke up to 100% is super handy. So getting it up to the 10% effect chance on the S1 becomes a tool you definitely want to have. If you're on a budget, you can even just get it 2 points into the 5% effect chance, so you're about to miss 10% and then maybe a little bit further, 15% outside of your 90%. It's a lot of numbers. So just make sure if it's a debuff character, you have the effect chance, you have their passive, and you have the cooldown, and, you know, obviously effect chance here, have that. On the flip side, Sea Phantom Politis has a very different Mola order. Her ultimate only has 1 point, -1 cooldown. We like for her to have more of a uptime on her OP skill, which gives rage to her entire team and pulls dual attacks. Her passive accounts for a lot of her survivability, since 100% chance for a 1-turn stealth buff keeps her relatively safe. It's what, as an opener, she gets to build really squishy for. As long as she's stealth, you don't have to build her super bulky. But if we were to look at her S1, as a support character, she does nothing but damage. If there is somehow a effect chance that is tied to her buff strip, you know, dispelling one buff, then we want to level that up. But because most of the time, you don't really care about her damage scaling is not good, and most of the time she clicks this, you're going to be pulling a dual attack from the highest attack ally. This is something you can safely skip. Looking at something like New Moon Luna, S3, I mean, that's a 3-turn cooldown. You better get every single point of that. That's not even a debate. The cooldowns are generally some of the most important points you can spend. As far as her S1 goes, you'll notice that she has combat readiness from 15 up to 20% max. I just plus 15 her because I like the character, but if you want to save, you can skip it entirely, since S1 and the subsequent damage doesn't really matter. But if you have a little bit of MolaGoras to spare, I would at least recommend bumping up the 5% combat effectiveness, combat readiness rather, just because getting her to cycle her cooldowns and lap her turns is one of her most powerful tools. And speaking of her most powerful tools, her S2 is super strong, splashes a lot of damage, but since it deals additional proportionate damage, you actually want to leave this one completely blank. I just happen to plus 6 on her skill 2 because one game, I think I missed kill by like 100 HP or something, and I told myself never again. So that's also something you can do, which is skill them as you need them. If you always kill and you never miss a kill, then who cares? But if you ever miss kill and that was like your deciding match for you to finish your game into Legend, well, then now you know. You know, you're going to have to climb your matches again, but now you know that the extra 5%, 10%, maybe even here the 35% damage would have mattered. So outside of openers, you also have characters like support characters. These are also some of the strongest characters in the game, and these are really simple. You are looking for cooldown, minus cooldown, plus 2 soul gain. Diane's one of the most popular soul weavers right now. Her limited banner got a rerun. And if you look at all of her skills, they all have some kind of minus cooldown. And for the support characters, their buff uptime is really important. So getting that cooldown, making sure their attack buff, the barrier, anti-crit, yada yada stays up as long as possible, super important. Barrier strength keeps your team healthy, we'll take those. And as far as her S1 goes, the damage is pretty negligible, but I would also recommend getting the combat readiness push, since the more she gets to have combat readiness, the more turns she takes, which also means the more she cycles her cooldowns, and that's how DN ends up being a turn cycling ghost, takes a billion turns in a row and applies infinite buffs with 100% uptime for the rest of her team. That's how she does that. So do not underestimate the combat readiness. The damage doesn't really matter. This is just from a period where I played the character so much, and you're gonna be clicking a lot of S1. Sometimes you just want like an extra 300, 500, 800 damage. If you play the character a lot, remember the rule 1, guys. If you play the character a lot, it is worth, even if it's just a couple hundred damage at the time. Another really good example is this guy, Meteor Koeric. The S3, you want as much cooldowns as possible, just to keep up his buff uptime. Now the S2 and the S1, if I was just any other player, the S2 I would just do -1 turn cooldown and 20% barrier strength. Since it scales to his HP and he can build a lot of it, it's actually really nice. And the S1, outside of the damage, again, it's just combat readiness. And as we covered before, guys, combat readiness is really nice on support units because the more combat readiness they have, say it with me guys, the more turns they take and the higher their buff uptime. Yup. Now the difference comes from when you start playing other characters than these long buff time sustain supports. Here we have Frida, who is often played with Cleave. And you play her mainly for one reason, because she works super well with soul burn compositions. And because of that, the most important thing for her is to max her S2. That way, you can always chain your turns together and form those combos. So you guys will notice something. With slower characters, it is better to get the high value over many turns, whereas with more aggressive compositions, it's about how much value you can jam pack into that first turn. Her S3, also pretty important. You don't really care about the cooldown, but since you're pushing so many high damage dealers, if you guys think about what characters I usually play with Frida, you got ML Ludwig, you got Bloodblade Corinne, they care about getting that turn. They care about how much combat readiness you're pushing them for. So if I was playing Frida, I would max S2 and max S3 as deeply as I can. If it comes to S1 though, it doesn't really matter. You could probably leave this one blank, but for me, because a lot of times I do end up playing a lot of matches, I like to pivot. So in order to enable a slower strategy, I do have the 15% combat readiness for Frida as well. But since she's a cleave character, we can follow the logic. If you're on a budget, you can cut this completely. Now, taking a bit of a flavor change here, we're going to cover tanks next. Tanks, kind of like supports, are all about getting cooldowns and getting value so that they can protect their team better. So one of the best tanks right now, especially after a buff, Fallen Cecilia. If we were to look at her skills, her S3 has nothing but damage, but there is one cooldown, so I would recommend hitting here. Her passive is all barrier strength. Enough said. Max this as soon as possible. No debates, right? And then her S1 is effect chance. Up to 100% chance to provoke. That is super handy, especially you can soul burn to ignore resistance. I would say 4, 5, and 3 is her priority if you're looking to play her a lot. Now, the reason why I have her plus 15, once again, the moment she is back into the metagame in RTA and she's a super popular character, a lot of times the couple thousand damage she does, you're going to want to boost it by like 25%, right? That little bit of like 1,000 to 1,500 damage that you're pushing out of this sometimes wins you the fight, and you want to take every edge you get. If Fallen Cecilia is a character you play all the damn time, then shit, max everything. And on the flip, we have a character like Adventurer Ross. This is the main character of the game. He is also a really popular tank, but as you guys can see, I don't have anything max. Even for a 3-star character, I'm just really lazy. Because if you guys look, he has nothing except damage dealt. as his skill up bonus, so there's really no point to maxing everything. And most of the time, because of his ability to pull dual attacks, his carries usually carry the damage load, so the extra 10% damage or whatever does not end up being consequential at all whatsoever. So following that logic, you guys should be able to fill in the blanks for characters like Crow. You know, we like lower cooldowns because it gives us more uptime on his damage mitigation, and then for the S2 is just combat readiness and minus cooldown, and of course we like the extra effect chance for provoke. So just follow that for every single tank you build as well. So after this, I like to talk about DPS. And DPS characters come in many flavors, so this gets a little bit complicated. So the first flavor of DPS I like to talk about is pure DPS, characters that are just there to do nothing but damage. And usually from their skill cooldown, you'll notice that it's nothing but damage as well. And because that's their one identity and it is 100% of their job description, you want to max everything. That is the rule of thumb. If they are a DPS, they're a damage dealer, regardless of whether they do debuffs, they're a cleave DPS, or a bruiser, you are probably going to have to plus 15 that character. And if they're a 5-star character like Genua or like Tori, that means minus 33 MolaGoras. Tori here, minus 1 turn cooldown. We really like her ultimate, gives speed up and attack up for 3 turns. That's hella nice. And because she's a damage limit character, we're just going to have to max her S2. It takes this from like, I think 70% damage she can take to 50% damage. All you have to do is put a tank on her, and then suddenly it takes something like 4 to 5 attacks to get through her. And of course, the S1 has nothing but damage, but you know, damage characters they're not very complicated. And if we were to look at something like a Bloodblade Corinne, this falls a lot closer to a Cleaver, because there's just either stat increase, which increases her attack, damage dealt, baked into everything. Yeah, you got no choice. That's minus 22 MolaGoras for you, buddy. And this applies to most characters, but let's take one of the best characters in the entire game right now, Abyssal Euphine, as an example. This is another plus 15 character. You don't really have a reason to not max her out, outside of you don't have the MolaGoras, just because she does damage off her S1, it does a lot of damage, and when she's transformed, it does even more damage, so you want to keep this maxed ASAP. The ultimate, I would say the most important thing is the minus 1 turn cooldown. As long as you have that, even if she doesn't close out the game, which she mostly does, when she hits that trauma. And of course, as is with all passives, in general, it is advised you max this. It's 30% combat readiness denied to the opponent. Just maxing it is 3 points. It denies 50%, which is one of the strongest effects in the entire game. So you should do that. And this applies to almost every single bruiser in the game, unless they have something that don't apply, right? Empyrean Ilanov, that's another bruiser / tank. And you just want to be able to max as many things as possible. Her passive has a utility that you want to plus 15. Navy Captain Landy as well, same rule. Damage on the S1, damage on the S3. Passive gives you the best chance of giving her anti-crit. So we take that maxed as much as we can. Now, there is one archetype of character that breaks that rule, and is fixed damage DPS. Boss Arunka, if you are playing her on Rocket Punch Gauntlet or MOAS on her release, she follows this rule, which is that you actually do not have to max anything that says damage. If anything, if you are a super new player and you are looking to play Boss Arunka, all you have to do is max the S2. And I don't even think you need the S2. You could play her as a perfectly competent character at +0. Because most of her damage will not come from her skills. It'll come from the additional extra tick of damage after she's used her skill from her artifact. Now, if you play the game a lot, what'll happen is sometimes you'll do like 3,000 to 4,000 natural damage. The extra tick through defense break does something like 8,000 to 9,000, and you miss a kill. If you miss lethal that way, then I would say, okay, yeah, you know, you have a reason to put in 10%, 20%, 35%, whatever that margin is that you think you'll need, put that in. But other than that, like extra defense break chance, like it goes from 60 to 75. That's not even that big of an increase. So you could skip this completely. But if you happen to play in team compositions where you're constantly pulling dual attacks with her Soul Burn, well, then you want to guarantee your high defense break chance with that dual attack. So as you guys can see, we're looping once again back to rule 1. Skill up for the thing that you play the most. If you constantly play for that Soul Burn, defense break, dual attack win condition, then yeah, that is a great idea. But if you're like me and most of the time you're just sitting there watching her go, hey, she countered to do a lot of damage, you could honestly play her at +0, it really doesn't matter. And last but not least, I do want to cover this archetype, the Debuff DPS. These characters have not been in the meta for a long time, right? The burn and bleed and bomb characters. But since there is a frenzy in RTA that kind of promotes their usage right now, I'll go over them real quick. So if you look at a character like Bihu, whose entire identity is he strips buffs, strips your immunities, lands burns on you, and he detonates the burns. His skills look like this, right? He's here to land a burn and then detonate the burn. Because most of his damage is baked into the burn and the detonation, you don't care about the S1. His S3 is really simple. It's got -1 cooldown, and if you don't kill in the first rotation, you do want this up as soon as possible, so just make the simple investment of putting it in. Now, his S2 is where it's at. It gives him 30% attack and defense, so if you do that, well, you want to make sure you give him as much attack as possible. Also, I don't know why I picked this guy. It's not like he's even a relevant character in burn compositions. I should just be looking at Summertime Iseria instead. Okay, yeah, this is a better example. Most of her damage comes from her bombs and the artifact, right? So this also comes from experience, right? Knowing where the damage is coming from. So Summertime Iseria has the artifact for her bombs. So most of the time, her S1 doesn't even matter. If you play almost always with a buff stripper as her opener, then the S1 doesn't even matter at all. The S2, well, she gets 50% free attack. Perfect. We care about attack scaling for bomb characters, so we just want to jam as much attack as possible. And for the S3, you just care about the 1-turn cooldown. Just in case she doesn't get the fight done, the job's not done, you want to lap it back, and then detonate your bombs again. The only reason I have her at +15 is because back when I used to play her a lot, sometimes, even after you detonate the bombs, really tanky players, legend players, will be able to survive by like a smidge of their HP. So if that happens, well, you know, you're just hoping the extra 10 to 20% damage, the flat damage, it's about 2,000 damage or so, will get the job done. Now, I do want to contrast this with something like Lidica, which has been a super popular cleave opener as of late, and how to mola her actually became a question. So her S3, you can see this. She's a debuff opener, so she's there to disarm your opponents, defense break them, and let your team run them over. She can apply a lot of debuffs like defense break, bind. And because most of the time you're winning the game, you don't even care about this cooldown. 4 turns is pretty short considering that she generates a lot of combat readiness for herself, so it's not the worst. Her S2, you don't even need a single point in it. You don't care about the damage, you care about the debuffs, and there is nothing that increases it. So we can ignore the S2, and S1, well, it inflicts bleed and detonates the bleed. A lot of people think because it's bleed, it's a lot of damage, you should increase the effect chance. It'll be 80% for 2 bleeds. No, it doesn't really matter, because most of the time you play her, she doesn't really have any attack anyway. Her build, if you do play her in a cleave setup, she's the setup, she's not the damage. You don't care about her damage. Most of the time her damage is irrelevant. So you can completely ignore the S1, ignore the S2, and if you really cared, S3 for the cooldown, and she'll do her job perfectly fine. This build will be fine 99.9% of times, and there's maybe a 1% scenario where the bleed effect chance matters. Okay, yeah, I really can't go over every single character, so as I hit this outro, I'm just going to slowly go down, and hopefully you see the character you want. This is how I have all of them molaed. Anyways, I hope the video's been helpful to you guys. I've just gotten way too many questions about how to skill up characters today, so I figure I'd throw this video out real quick, so hopefully it's helpful, and if it's helpful, you can always help me back by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and yeah, that's all I got for you guys for today. Later down the week, though, I should have a lot more videos coming up, especially short guides, and yeah, I just have too many characters built, so I'm never going to get to the bottom of the list. But every single thing you see here generally follows those 3 rules I taught you. Mola, the thing you play the most. If you're short, then Mola on a budget. If you have a lot of Molas, then do the full plus 15. Otherwise, you know, every archetype of characters will have different requirements on what they're going to need you to bring to them. Okay, that's it from me, guys. Take care, and I'll see you guys later. See ya.